Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 84th edition of Paola's Studiolo, and I'm truly honored to have the amazing author with us this evening, Sarah Winman. Sarah, thank you so much for coming to the Studiolo.
My absolute pleasure. And, how lovely that so many people have, joined us this evening. It's amazing.
Thank you. When I started, when I advertised this season of Studiolos, you could not imagine how many emails came my way. Um, just of the readers telling me how much they loved your book and how much it touched them. And it was really an absolute joy to read. And what I would love to do is, first of all, I hope I'm going to have a signed copy by you one day. Maybe not this time in Florence, but maybe next time.
Okay, deal.
Deal?
Yeah.
What I would love to start with is maybe to ask you, how did this idea of the book come? When did it come to you for the first time?
So the very small seed happened in 2015. So that pretty much, apart from a couple of sort of visits to Florence way back, like 98, and then that was the main time that I was going to spend any time in Florence. I didn't know Florence. I'd done a very basic art history, Renaissance art history course at the National Gallery in London. When that had finished, I had this opportunity, some days left, so I could go to, I thought, well, I could go to Florence. And I went in January 2015. And I was having lunch one day in this restaurant. It's so clear to me, even today when I talk about it and go back there. So a restaurant called I Brindolone in the Oltrarno.
Yes.
And no one was there. It was quite a late lunch. All the locals had gone. And so there were photographs on the wall of Florence underwater. And I think I said it to you kind of briefly, how strange that is, because the only city that should really have water in its streets, theoretically, is Venice, of ones I know. But I knew it wasn't Venice. So I talked to the owner and he brought out some books. I'd never known that this had happened. And then he started to talk a little bit more. I still didn't have the feeling that I know happens when a story chooses you. It wasn't then at that moment. It came a little bit later. Um, but he told me some things, and I started to look at the city in a very different way. Started to look at where the watermarks, the water levels were. And then I got another book, and then I started to learn about mud angels, and that's when the story hit me, because it just seemed an incredibly romantic thing to do. And how could I build a story around that? Because I didn't think people knew it. But at the same time, as far as feeling excited about a new subject in this way, I was also pushing the story away because I knew nothing about Florence. It seemed so overwhelming to be writing about a city that I just didn't know in that way. I had no knowledge of. So many books had been written about Florence. Was there a need for another one? That came. So I spent a long time pushing it away and not really knowing how I was going to start this book. I don't plan books. I kind of jump in. So I had that seed. So somewhere, someone was going to be a mud angel and they were going to be there and it was going to be so romantic, because actually I would have liked to have been there. So there has to be some kind of subjective element that I can put myself into that place. And that was the seed of it. And then it was really, so that we're talking 66, then it was like, well, where do we start with this? And where do we end with this? And that was taken out of my hands. That became about, well, we start in 1944. Liberation time, bridges being blown. And then somebody told me very sweetly, an Italian said, don't go into the 80s, it's too complex politically. So I was like, all right, 79. And that was it.
So that was the timeline. Wow.
That was my timeline. Yes, that was the seed and that was the timeline.
Okay. I also know that Frederick Hart's wonderful book, Florentine Art Under Fire, had also was another seed that was given to you. Actually, another picture, another visual, correct?
Totally. So I picked up a book in 2015 at the Academia, and it was called Dark Water. And it was an interesting book. But the thing that I really loved about it was, so I would say this to any writer, check out bibliographies. They're a wonderful source to sort of start directing you. So I went through all of these books, went to the British Library and started to see, well, what ones are going to really grab me. And I could only get it because online it's so expensive.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was, whether it was self-published, but it's fiercely expensive. British Library had it. And I loved his idea. Some of it was very dry. So that also was interesting for me because it started to throw up questions about how am I going to write about art if one of my characters is an art historian? How are we going to do this? Because some of his work was making me fall asleep. I mean, that's just because of where I've come from. Wasn't that interesting? And then it would come alive. You know, it would come alive as he's going through the hills in this Jeep called Lucky 13, and the bombs are falling. And so he gave me the start of the book. For anybody who doesn't know, driving through the hills, the artillery is going. That part is pretty much under Allied occupation now. Germans have moved on, but it's still, you know, it's still pretty hairy. And he talks about coming across this albergo, and there are Italian superintendents and there were Allied personnel there, and they were having lunch. And he's talking about this, and he said, no, and there was a couple of English spinsters. I was like, what? What do you mean there were a couple of English spinsters? You just thrown that in, having lunch while these bombs are going off. So I love the word spinster. Normally I would hate the word spinster, but I thought it did tie up with Forster and what was also kind of bubbling at that time. So I was like, okay, thank you. There's my start. So I had these two women having lunch as the bombs were falling. I knew one would be an art historian. It turns out both were, and they knew each other. And then as I moved on with his book, he was uncovering the works of art in different villas. And so I had my computer open as I went through these works of art to see which one would really resonate with me as being this kind of special and visually stunning and would be like unlike any other. Because once, you know, there's a lot of similar paintings, you know, out there. Of course, if you look at it, they're not similar at all, but visually they, you know, you go into the Uffizi and you see Annunciation, you see another one, you see another one. It's like, whoa, okay, I've seen a lot. So what painting? And then I came across his Pontormo, the Deposition of the Cross. And I just was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. This, to have it cinematically lit with a lantern coming out of the gloom would be amazing and fantastic. And so that was where I got that from. I didn't know the painting before. And then it was only later that I realized the painting would eventually be round the corner from Santo Spirito. I didn't know that. So lots of these little beautiful interweavings and connectedness started to happen as I moved through it.
Amazing. Sarah, your book is kind of sprinkled with magic. And I wish I can show you how many things I've underlined going through it. I must confess, as an art historian and someone who has studied Florence for the last 20 years, every time I grab a book, I always look for mistakes, right? I'm kind of
Yeah, of course.
thinking, oh my gosh, something will be wrong. And, you know, but with you, everything was absolutely perfect. Your research was immaculate. And the way you describe the works of art and the settings is just truly incredible. I learned a few things, which was really amazing. One of them is when you talk about the war and destruction that happened along the Arno River. At one point, you say that there was from Ponte Vecchio, you can clearly see Or San Michele and then the Duomo. Mm-hmm. And I think you managed through your book to bring us these really lovely visuals, and you could have I never thought about that. Or, you know, the flood and the way you kind of tell us what was destroyed and how there was a cheese store owner who at one point in the street, and he says hello. You can really understand that how many businesses, how many people, the entire Florence was actually influenced by this incredible flood. And I think you said something really beautiful. Let me see if I can find it. You said the shared loss became a shared bond.
Yeah.
And with the flood, no matter how long how much I studied the flood and how much I read about it and the images I saw, what really, for me personally, was an incredible event I will never forget is in 2016, I was invited to have a dinner with students from Florida State University who were back in town. Back then they were now in their 70s, and their professor who was with them during the time, he also came back, and it was incredible to be in the room full of these 70 years old people, men and women, who obviously had a bond that connected them for the rest of their lives once they were in Florence for that year in 66.
Yeah.
And to realize that that bond was more than a family, more than a blood bond. It was actually something that really connected them forever, united them forever. So truly wonderful. How
Yeah.
did you go about your research? Can we maybe divide it into few different groups? First of all, about art history, because the things you write about David, about these iconic works of art in Florence, but also about painters like Plotilla Nelli that most people wouldn't really know about. Maybe in our group here they do,
Yes.
but it might be a new name to so many of your readers. How did that art historical bit come together for you?
Really tricky, actually, because I'm not an art historian and I hadn't studied it. So it was about how was I going to talk about a subject that, I'm enthusiastic about my art, but that's not always enough. You've got to give something. If it's too much one way, then it becomes incredibly dry, more academic, which will be appreciated by some people, but everything I write is inclusive. Where I come from in the arts, it's about making this a democratic, inclusive space. So that really wasn't, I could have gone online, I could have found lots of papers, but that wasn't it. Also, just writing what I know wasn't going to be enough, really. So there was this middle ground that I really had to find. And I thought the only way, one of the things that I've always been inspired by is almost more than reading, is by hearing oral stories, people telling me their stories. It's very important because you get the embellishment as well. It doesn't always have to be fact, and stories live in the embellishment, and the color. So running through all of this is this incredible interconnectedness, Forster's interconnectedness. We can talk again, but how once I'd made the decision to write about this and write about the city, it was as if the ley lines were just fizzing and I was being helped. So I have told this story, so forgive me if some of you have heard it, but I think it's kind of important to some degree. Not big important, but maybe it's an interesting for certainly the mud angels out there. I was going to get acupuncture, as you do. I have a lot of acupuncture when I'm writing because I need as much help as possible. So this is a new acupuncturist. She was an Italian acupuncturist who was standing in for somebody, and she knew I was writing, and I went to her this particular day, and usually I don't open up in this way, but she said, "Sarah, how are you doing?" I went, "Awful, awful. I have a lead character who's an art historian, and I know nothing. I know nothing. What am I thinking of? Why did I do this to myself?" And she goes, "Well, what would be perfect? What would you like?" I went, "An art historian. I'd like to meet an art historian." She goes, "Okay, where? Tell me really what you want." I said, "Okay, I would like an art historian who went to Florence as a mud angel, who's Anglo-American, so really, or they've got to speak English pretty good for me so we can converse because my Italian's not that good, and who's still there so I can meet them. That would be really important." So while she's sticking in the needles, she's looking at her phone, and I hear it going, bing, bing, a few more needles go in. And she goes, "Okay, okay." Phone, 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 bing, bing, needles, needles, needles. And then finally, when she's taken them out, she goes, "Okay, tonight you're going to get an email from somebody. I hope it's useful." And that evening, I did get an email, and they'd found me an art historian in Florence who was Anglo-American, who went to Florence during the flood, who was still there, and who was expecting a phone call from me the next day because I was going to Florence. This woman was Stella Rudolph. So in her time, She died in May 2020, but in her time, she was a very known art historian. Her subject was Calomerati, so it was Baroque period. Baroque, as she used to call it. She was married to another art historian called Gian Lorenzo Mellini. So in their time of the sort of 60s, 70s, early 80s, they were part of that clique who were around Florence. Anyway, I met her, and I liked her immediately, and I really wanted her to like me, so I took her loads of wine. But then I learned that her favorite wine was Rosato Frizzante, and I didn't take that. But anyway, we got on. She kept thinking that I was an art history student and would send me off to obscure churches. And I'd go, yeah, no. I said, what are you doing today? She goes, I'm going to the market. I said, can I come? And she goes, no. I go, okay. And then we would arrange each time I'd go back. Then we got to know each other. And then I would phone and we would meet for drink and we'd meet for coffee. And then it changed. And she says, like, what are you working on now? I went, still a novel. Stella, still a novel. She goes, okay. And I thought, this isn't about her. It's about my questions. It's about how my questions will unlock what I want from her, because she's such a big brain. I need to get in between someone. So I started off really safe, with really beginners, and there's going to be people groaning here. I said, Stella, what do you think of Michelangelo? And she was like, oh, he was an earthquake. And I was like, I've got you. And so that was the first thing that went in my notebook. He was an earthquake, meaning only somebody who had that immense history of it all could use that phrase. I couldn't use that phrase. I don't know many people. And so we moved on in that way, that I knew that it had to be a more basic question, or, we have one of beauty and the beauty of art, the beauty of nature. And she was like, it would be a jolt, like, where does this question come from? That's not, she was big on attribution and how that moved forward. So it was really sort of playing different kind of possibilities and getting into the line. She didn't really, I don't think she really liked Michelangelo. He wasn't, and she didn't really like Sienna. So she would come out with things. She goes, oh yeah, well, Sienna, that's just it is a capsule for the Middle Ages. And they're really bad losers of paleo. And then she'd move on to something else. So in the original, when I gave this booking, I had a lot of her. There's a lot of Stella in there, and most of the things you probably read were Stella.
They were absolutely beautiful. Even the moment when you write and you say, if Michelangelo was born in Bologna, how did you say it? If Michelangelo had been born in Bologna, it all had been different.
Oh, well, yeah, of course, that was Stella.
Yes. And, I think
of course it was.
Yes. I mean, she added that beautiful layer of someone who didn't just do their research and read a few books in art history, but someone who has actually lived with it and reflected on these themes for a long time.
Exactly that.
Absolutely wonderful. All you know about Michelangelo's David, you write, it's a study of character.
Yes.
It's actually not just idealized naked man. There's so much more there.
Yeah. And yes, that was her. And then I got into understanding that, and then I could add my own things. So some speeches I could write myself, and then I would throw in a little bit of hers to sort of, move it along. But the Rape of the Sabine Women, that was all Stella. We had a walk around the square there, and I said, what do you think? And then that whole speech about that, I mean, it was just wonderful how she phrased it. She was always just a bravo performance, just a bravo. He knew what he was doing. He just did that, and he expected applause every time somebody walked past it. There was such a beautiful element. So we did, we had a wander, and there was a lovely moment which didn't go in the book. I don't know whether I'll use it again, with San Firenze. She loved San Firenze, the Church of San Firenze. She loved the outside because she said it's so barren until you put that still life flower there. She says that brings it alive. But when I was with her, this is how it was. I would be forever trailing, trying to get these notes down. And she flung open the doors and she goes, perfection, 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 harmony, high relief altar, confessional, confessional, confessional.
Oh,
And she goes, and the Filippini is still here. And I go, but why is that important? And she goes, continuity. And I said, and she goes, the value is in continuity. And I was like, this is how it was. It was like this the whole time. And then in between, it was like trying to find out, well, what did that mean? And then she'd give me a clue, like Counter-Reformation. So I got an education. I got an education in the same way that I suppose Evelyn was educating people around, using the language of education
yeah.
to include people, make it an inclusive education for the people, you know.
You really did. I mean, even your characters, they span different classes of the society and they work so hard to bring in. It's truly a beautiful tapestry. Can I also ask you just quickly about Eve Borsuk? I see that you mentioned her at the end of your book, and since Eve Borsuk is one of these incredible icons in art history and is no longer with us too, did you
Mm.
have a chance to spend some time with her as well?
I didn't. I didn't. I think when I had the opportunity, I'm not sure she was very well at that point.
Okay.
So I met a woman called Jane Ireland, and who's lovely, and I see her when I go back to Florence. She moved there in '78 and was married. She's not an art historian, loves her art, very knowledgeable. And she said, have you been to the British Institute of Florence? And I said, I haven't. No, I don't. Because I had lunch with her and she said, okay, you should go there just for the atmosphere as well. Got a great library. And it was a very useful library, certainly for the 1901 section. But she said, do you know Eve Borsuk's companion guide to Florence? I went, I don't. She goes, I got a first edition. Have it? I went, no, you keep it. I will find it when I get back to London. What was really useful about the first edition was that it came out just before the flood, because that's the
Wow.
problem when you're writing. What you think is around today was not around in, so I take them there in 53, for instance.
Yeah.
You know, there are some things that are not open. Bardini Gardens are not open. You know, they weren't
Yeah.
known as the Bardini Gardens. And so, you know, I learned very quickly that these things really do, you need to find them. And if you don't find them, they probably weren't there.
Yeah.
And so I was safe up until 1966 because I trusted her book.
Wow.
I thought she was meticulous. And so up until 66, that was very, very useful for
Yeah.
me to know. And then afterwards, of course, it was mayhem because everything moved. But by 66, I felt that I had talked about the art in a way that I didn't need to thereafter. It then became about living, really. So that had been established at that point, and I felt that it was kind of safe. And now when I look back, if you go through, I've seen various editions of the book that may be in 79 or 92, and they've been changed a little bit. She's added things. So things have suddenly appeared and things
Yeah.
are open and other things are not. So I did get one thing wrong, actually, which I didn't know until I looked at a later one, an 82 version, much later, that the stone benches disappeared in something like the late 70s.
In Santo Spirito.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I couldn't find out why. And then I did find out that there had been some recobbling of the square, and I figured they probably just did that, and in the Italian way didn't put them back. But they did come back in '92.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
You know, just a side note, but Eve Borsuk, I met her at Villa Itati when I was just a graduate student in Florence, and I was meant to be at Syracuse University for just a year.
Yeah.
And I went to Villa Itati, which is so hard to get to, and I spent the whole day trying to get all my notes in and all the books I had to find, and because you can't really check them out. So we met Eve Borsuk, and when I left, it started raining, like really, really bad.
Yep.
And a car stops, and who's in the car? Eve Borsuk. I said, hop on in. So I get to, drive with my idol in the car. And I tell her, I'm only here for a year, but I really would like to stay. And she kind of looks at me sideways and she says, oh, one more victim. One more victim of, Florence, because it does get under our skin, which I think
It's
you have felt
true.
for sure, right?
Yep. It is so true. What a wonderful experience to have had.
Yeah,
But I do describe it. It's a city that does get under your skin, even though you can be infuriated with it. I mean, even more so at times, with crowds and stuff. And you have a very small window for certainly those who live there when it can be your city again. I know that.
yeah,
But yeah, Stella said that, the same thing as you're saying, or Eve said, we all came back. And when I used to go and see Stella, so she lived on San Nicolo, she had this lovely cantone a Porto, and she would talk to them because it was new and it was operated by somebody. And she would come down and I would hear the clack, clack, clack of her shoes down the stairs. And she would go, "You're back. Welcome home." And it
hopefully.
was a very sweet thing. But it's exactly what you're saying. It entrances you, doesn't it, in a way? And it's it's a hard thing to put your light to say why. Of course, the light, of course, the works of art, of course, but it's also something else. It's sort of being mesmerized and hypnotized by something that you find something of yourself in that city. I think that's the closest thing that maybe you just can't find anywhere else.
Mm, I absolutely love that. You're so right. The book was also really special for me because I used to work for many years in Santa Croce Church.
Ah,
And believe it or not, I got to talk to the friars who were the first ones to open the doors that morning of the November 4th. And you're really good in the book to also mention that the last big flood of that kind of dimension would have been in 1333. So just interesting how, this incredible tragedy hit Florence again. And in the medieval times, as soon as they kind of got over that flood, and you can just imagine how many people would have lost their lives back then, they kind of come out from this flood, the city is polished and clean, and then what happens next? Bubonic plague in 1348.
yeah.
So, another like horrible, horrible worldwide tragedy. But in Santa Croce, the friars who were there at the time, they would always talk about it. It was something that was such a big part of their existence there. And maybe something that you will find amazing and all of our listeners today is that in 2016, when they had a big anniversary of the flood, they actually went down in the crypt of the church and they found fango. There still was a layer of that horrible reminder of the flood of 66. And they actually put them in small boxes and we gave them as a little token to people who
Oh
were
wow. Oh
coming at the
wow.
time. So Florence really never forgot, and these monuments never forgot it. Um,
No, I mean it, there was I what's the Taylor Cressman or Cressman Taylor, a woman wrote Catherine Taylor Cressman or Cressman Taylor. Give me if anyone's a friend of hers for not getting her name correct. But she wrote a terrific book, which I think is being reprinted or called Ordeal by Water. And it's a fabulous diary of that time. And it helped so much in the timeline of when water came on, when it wasn't, what was happening in the city, where you could get candles, what wasn't working. I mean, it was quite brilliant. And then sort of the rest you could sort of look at with photographs and get a sense of how that would have been and the horror. But it was sort of underpinned by that book particularly, which was really, really very brilliant.
yeah,
I do wonder about that waking up at that time. I mean, it must have been horrific, the sound of that river, the force of that river, because it's quite a wide river. It would have been so deep. And it was traveling, what was it, 45 miles an hour?
yeah,
And obviously more as it's being funneled into certain streets. And yes, a miracle that so few, I mean, one life is too much, but so few lives in the
well,
grand scheme of that kind of destruction were lost. But, but yeah, what was it? I think it was 15,000 businesses went out
yes. You
of
really give
business.
us a very nice summary of the just kind of the aftermath of the flood. I think it's amazing. You say something like 33 people had lost their lives, 50,000 families lost their homes, 15,000 cars, 6,000 businesses lost, and just these are many artigiani, many of them actually never opened their doors after that flood of
No, they
66.
didn't,
So
because there wasn't insurance. People were too poor to insure, and um, yeah, but somebody told, it was somebody telling a story saying it, but it was what also came in was at that point after the clear up that people didn't return. And it was the movement out of the artisanal class, which he said was really significant of that period
yeah,
of time from
yeah,
Florence. A real change.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I found that very interesting, that in these disasters, there is a kind of a cynical cleansing as well, which it wasn't for me to talk about because I'm not Florentine. I don't live there, but I could see it. You kind of start to pick up this in many places in the world. Disasters, there's a movement of certain people out who will never return.
yeah, yes, yes, yes. I want to say one more thing about Santa Croce, which is
Yes, do. I want to hear more about Santa Croce.
in the dining room of the friars, the room that no one gets to see because
Yep.
it's really just reserved for them. On the ledge, very high ledge of the wall, there is one little coffee cup still on that ledge because the water, how it was rising up,
Oh,
lifted it there and it just stayed on. So the monuments to the flood is still really there and they live with it every day. Sarah, your book has touched many lives. I think you brought so much beauty. I have two questions. One, and I see questions are popping in, and I want to make sure that all of our guests today get to ask you questions they have. So I don't want to keep you all for myself, but I wanted to ask you about the title. Tell us a little bit about
yeah.
Still Life and how did the title come about?
Yeah, so that wasn't the original title. So the working title was called oh my God, oh no, I know. It was called The Restoration of Ulysses Temper. So he was the first character, closely followed by Evelyn. He was he's not based on my grandfather, but my grandfather was a soldier, working class soldier in the 8th Army. So, when I was talking about the timeline in 1944, it just felt, how would this be? Working class soldier, being educated by a captain and seeing, even in its moment of destruction and horror, seeing beauty because it's there. So it was called that. And then it started to be called The Restoration of Ulysses. I mean, talk about like mouthful. Ulysses Temper, brackets, still life. And then I found, my partner gave me this book by Norman Bryson called 4 Essays on Still Life Painting. And the last essay was so influential. It was a speech of Evelyn's about still life painting and the feminine space, which I thought was just fabulous because it brought the book together. It brought it as an understanding as a whole about what this was. The whole book is about a feminine space. And I'm not talking about gender, I'm talking about energy. So the men are bringing up the child, the men are cooking. This is in the book, this is what is happening. The men are allowing the women to be as they want to be. They're not enforcing anything, something that I feel really strongly about. So good men. And that's what I've started to write about. And so he was writing about the feminine space. He was writing about how these paintings, well, this, how they were looked down upon, how the privileged male gaze ultimately was looking down and, just seeing the detritus of the lower classes in a way, the everyday, the mundane, as he talks about it, the triviality, as he talks about it, of these objects, a space that only, men may enter, but it's the space where only women work, kitchens, all of these places. And I was like getting so excited about it. And I wrote this speech and it seemed to me like it's still life, but taking on 4 meanings: still life, the continuity of life, still life, the silence and the quiet of life, and also this kind of interior scenes of of trivial objects that that hold memory, because this is what it is all about. Once you leave these rooms, these people still continue in their place. So I think that's how the title came about gradually. And I think titles do. I was reading that Muriel Spark, for those in Arezzo, she used to live there, and she would get the title and then she would write the book in like 6 weeks. I wish, my God, they take ages. And I start with a title, but I don't really start to understand the book until I really have done about 2 years on it, until I start to really carve away at it and understand what I want to say. It's like anything, any kind of creative venture, whatever it is a slight act of faith and trust that you're going to get there. But that's how that one came.
Beautiful.
But you know
Absolutely.
what? I'm still on your coffee cup. I felt really moved by that scene and that image, because
Yes.
it tells a story, doesn't it? It's a very beautiful image.
But I
Very,
think it is, but it also is a kind of insider story, right? When you are in that space with them, you look up and you see this tiny, tiny tazza just on
yeah,
that ledge because they can never really reach it again. There's no way they could even go high up and 30, what would that be? And this is like at the really the bottom of Santa Cruz. So it would have been oh my goodness, now the meters. I would have to look back to see, in the feet what it is, but it's incredible. They could never even
yeah.
go get it. Um, what I wanted to say is, yes, the Tatsa is there. Definitely, Santa Croce has all of these secrets that are, still part of its really of what the church is all about, I guess, and the
Yeah.
museum is all about, because there's so many flood markers there also by the Pazzi Chapel. So it's really for everyone to see. I wanted to say that your book has changed so many lives, and how did it change yours?
Oh, I got to know a city. I don't know it very well, but I got to know a city that calls me back every now and then. I sort of miss it. I met a wonderful woman called Stella. I've met lots of people, but she was very influential. And when I went back after she died, I wondered whether I would, because on her brass panel, the name's gone. Someone just put their other name on there. There were all these little moments of thinking she wasn't there, but of course she is there. You know, I go to see that painting, which may be a very obvious painting for people who, know a lot more about painting than I do, but I always have moments of wonder. I go in the painting, I go into the church just at the right moment where no one's in there, and I ask to go in, and I get the gate opened, and I can just be there, and it changed my life. It changed my life. It allowed me to write a book that um, moved people, touched people in a way that books have moved me, and that's a great privilege. I met many people through it, and they've told me their stories, and I find that a great privilege. Um, it was a book that came at the right time, I think. People wanted a bit of kindness, made me think about a lot of other things, made me think about found family, which is really important. It's given me a lot. Books do. I break my life up into what I was doing, who I knew, who I met in these sort of groups of books. So that was my fourth. And each one from start to finish and publication probably has taken up about 4 years of life. And so they're quite significant. And this one it gave me so much. I returned to this city and I do find it moving. I've met you. I met Camille, another great friend of mine, Vanessa.
Yeah.
We had done an event and we were both writing about Florence, and we've become friends ever since. Jane Ireland, who I talked about, my friend Tara, who's not in the city at the moment, but so many people who were there and who offered great support and kindness and, you know, a lot of value. Going to British Institute and seeing what was there, and the people who give lectures there. All of this is so valuable, and I wouldn't have had any of that. And also knowing about the flood. If
Yeah.
that was all I got out of it, and knowing what happened at that time and the significance, because we talked briefly that the significance for me was the children of the war generation in Europe and America who came. And that was really, really important after what had happened. So this democratization of everyone moving in to help and to be part of that.
Yeah.
So I think that's how it's changed.
Thank you very much. There will be so many comments and questions I would love to add, but I think I would love to now open the floor for everyone. We have very special guests with us today, and our dear friend Kamin Mohammadi is with us, and her book Bella Figura has touched many lives.
Yep.
As well, and I really thank Kamin for introducing us. And
yeah, me too.
Yes, because she is definitely one of those lights in Florence that shines very brightly.
Absolutely, she is. She's remarkable.
Yes, and I think she also popped a question in the chat, and we will get to it. And we have also the former Consul General of Florence from the U.S. who is in the call as well. And we have a Mud Angel. So I think I would love to start with the Mud Angel because Barbara has an anecdote for us. And I think we would probably love hearing it from her. So, and then everyone else, we will get to all the questions. I hope we can get to all the questions in the chat.
Okay.
Does that sound good, Sarah?
That sounds absolutely brilliant. Yes, let's do it.
Okay, perfect. Barbara, can you hear us? And do you want to plug in?
Sure can.
Hello.
And I'm unmuted. Hi.
I don't know what you did to, freeze the time. You look like you're only 40. But anyway, let's not go into that now. Let's talk about.
No, but let's do return to it when I see you. Hi, Sarah. Too bad we couldn't have chatted during your investigative time. I could have shared with you some stories that you won't find in the books, but I'd love to share a come around circle anecdote from just last year that I had in Florence. But starting with, I could have given you the romance of how I ended up in the flood. It turned out by accident and too many details, but suddenly found myself with 3 guys that I kind of liked each pretty much, all landing at Florida State University back from various excursions at the same time. And I thought, oh my gosh, I got to get out of here. And it was just then I saw the posters about Florida State starting its very first study abroad in 1966. And my dad was military. They understood moving about and being in other countries and the value of that. And so anyway, it wasn't too hard of a negotiation to get that opportunity. So the very first group landed in Florence. We took over a pensione because there was very little time for planning. It was done pretty darn fast for how those things work. And so we acquired the kitchen staff and the hotel rooms. I mean, but 3 gals to a room. So we're not talking luxury here. And we arrive in September, and by November, we have no water because of the flood, of course. We are brushing our teeth with Coca-Cola because there is no water. We are getting inventive of how we're going to shave our legs. I mean, all those little details that don't show up anywhere else is the life we are suddenly in. And we were kind of pampered sophomore, junior college students. We weren't into roughing it, which we then did. Well, our university shut classes down for 2 weeks and gave us over to the city to use how they would like to. And my first assignment turned out to be out on the balcony of this very rich family and rinsing off their dishes that had mud on them. Well, when some of us came back with those stories to our headmistress, we were reassigned to something more important. And I ended up in the human chain outside the bibliothèque, which is kind of interesting that one of my careers was as a librarian, but there I was as an 18-year-old passing materials for 2 seconds, invaluable materials to the next person, and the final person's putting them on a truck and off they're going to a given city or country that has volunteered to work on restoration with that category of item. Well, then let's see how go from 66 to 2023. And whoops, I've got to be connecting up soon. And you said something about Florence visit, the return, the draw. Well, from then on, I had a draw back to Florence. In many ways, it worked into my life till now. I am retired 15 years, and I live in Florence for what I say, because I live in Little Italy, San Diego, California. So I say I live in Italy 10 months of the year, little, and 2 months of the year, big. And so I make a rule for myself that I must speak some Italian with an Italian out on the sidewalk. And so I watch for an opportunity with my very basic language, but I do a twinkle in my eye. And the Italians are so lovely with, if you attempt something, of how much they'll be patient and interact with you. And I meant what I would call an old duffer, except that I better be careful because he was, as it turns out, 4 years older than I, in a coffee shop, and he had a darling dog. Well, I have just enough vocabulary, I could say in Italian, "Oh, how cute, how precious." And then everybody loves that you love their pet. And he began talking with me. Then I saw him about a month later, and he had a different dog. So I was able to comment on that. And then I could comment that I miss my cat. Well, through my 2 months there, I ended up running into him about 4 times. And the last time I was able to say, "What are you doing here? You are in my neighborhood." And we started talking. And it turns out that he had been an architectural student during the flood. He was Florentine born and bred. And he was helping to get the materials out. And this man that I've just met, 60 years later, had been blocks from me at the Uffizi. And we were getting materials. I mean, how can you figure that? And Florence is so special. It's just so special. So thank you for letting me share something I haven't had anyone to share with.
Well, thank you. That's a great story. It's lovely hearing about that part of your life. Thank you.
And Sarah, I love in your book when you talk about the students making a human chain and how they would sometimes have a glimpse of blue, beautiful lapis lazuli blue or gold, and you say someone's holy, these little glimpses of holy. So really beautiful. The questions that are here, Victoria says, how did this compelling cast of characters evolve, and what was the inspiration? Also, Ulysses makes globes like his father. What was the inspiration for that? And also Claude, the opinionated parrot.
Okay, I need to speed up.
That's a lot.
My answer. That's a lot. Okay, so as I say, characters I don't plan. So we started briefly with Ulysses. He's driving very much like Frederick Hart. He's got his Jeep. He's got his captain, being educated. Boof, he meets this art historian by the road who's been having lunch. That comes together. I've written in the past about an older woman befriending, or vice versa, a younger man. I think it's I don't know, I think it works really beautifully. That missed generation in between. It's a very potent friendship. So I had that. They were then going to disperse. He's going to go back to London. So what does he need? We've already established that he has a wife in the early. There's a pub. East End would have pianist, big thing. So there'd be a pianist there. A lot of these characters came out of need. So Cressy was the older father figure because Ulysses' parents had died when he was quite young. Then when I realized that Ulysses was going to be going to Florence, how is that going to work? He doesn't have Italian. He's going to need to work. and he needs some help. So then I thought Cressy can go. And at that point, it was like, I put in the lines, Cressy was a go-to man in need. He could fix anything, do anything. So it's like, great, he's now got that. So a lot of these characters were working on each other. What are they showing? What are they showing that's lacking in another character? And how do they support each other? So they came around through that. Same thing with Claude, coming back, East End. So East End at that point, certainly around Spitalfields. This is not Spitalfields, it's slightly to the left of Spitalfields, but it used to be a Huguenot area. Huguenots were known for keeping songbirds. Its proximity to the docks, there was also, which would bring in exotic birds and animals. So it didn't seem a big deal for them to have a parrot. And then the parrot grew on me. The parrot was originally just to be like comedy, a bit of comedy gold, because everyone laughs at a parrot. You can do a lot with a parrot. And then I quite liked, well, the parrot started just talking by itself in a way, which sounds a bit nuts. You started to quote Shakespeare, and I thought, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. So the parrot's going to be saying things that other people can't. So it's almost like a Greek chorus. The parrot is going to fill in what the characters can't say, which I quite liked as well. And this whole idea at the beginning of him being malty and having PTSD, it was clear as I moved on that actually he represented the community, that they were all in PTSD really after the war. And that's what he was showing. So that's how Claude came about, that it was just took over his own character. What else was it? That was characters. Globes, right. So I did some writing for something called Spitalfields Life, which is a blog by the gentle author in London. So now and then I would do stories of people in the East End. I would interview them and write them. He does them every day. He's been doing them for years, and it's a brilliant blog if anyone's interested. It's called Spitalfields Life blog. He ran a story by a man called Peter Bellaby, of a man called Peter Bellaby. Peter Bellaby was trying to find a handmade globe for his father's 80th birthday, and he couldn't. So he decided to make it. Took him 5 years, I think. His dad was quite much older by the time he got this globe, but he learned how to do it with the gauze, painting it, the spheres, the plaster packs. He learned. He now has a multi-million pound business of globe making. Look him up, Peter Bellaby and Co. He makes the most beautiful globes. I thought, Ulysses needs a job if he's going to go somewhere, if he's going to up sticks. He needs a job that will sort of fit in with the city and how that would be and the history of the city, and a job whereby he could earn money by himself. He doesn't really need the language. And that's why he became a globe maker, because I quite liked him. He would be part of the artisanal place in the city, because that's where they make globes. And so that's why, and I did go to Peter Bellaby's to learn how to do it. And he showed me. But of course, I saw him in 2018, but he told me how it would have been done roughly in the 1950s and before. And the etching, I mean, how did they do that? The copper plate etching, and then the reverse of that. I mean, it took me a long time to work out how to write that in a very succinct way, but he was brilliant. So I think I've covered all three.
Yes, I love how Ulysses, in my own mind, he's holding the world in his hand, and he's such a wonderful man that we need people like that to actually hold us up.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the questions that came in by email is, who did you base Evelyn on? Was there an specific inspiration for that character, or did it really just start with Frederick Hart and then kind of evolved from there?
Yeah, no, it wasn't based on anyone. I don't base any characters. They're just aspects of, when I say aspects of myself, I don't mean myself. It's aspects of myself and all the conversations I've ever had in my life with somebody, all the people I've ever met, all the films I've ever seen, all the books, how we absorb all that. And so, at that point, I was thinking of Forster and A Room with a View. That was going to be the link. So I had 1901, I had the beginning, you know, with Frederick Hart. And she came to me as this rather bohemian older person who had come out of that place in London, predominantly kind of privileged, but, you know, a father as an artist. And it sort of just, I built her from there. So she would quote more Dante. And then we had the parrot with Shakespeare. And I didn't put the quote in, but, you know, I think T.S. Eliot said that the modern world is divided between Shakespeare and Dante. There is no third. So that sort of seemed a nice balance. So yeah, that's how she came out. She's probably an amalgam of many, many people who I've seen along the way. And, you know, I'm trying to think, maybe a bit of Diana Athill and her traveling and her, you know, her class and yeah.
Interesting.
Was even inspired.
I see Camille put a lovely question, actually lovely note here on the flood.
Has she?
Yes. Do you want to share it with us, Camille, more than actually me reading it?
Yeah, Camille, where are you?
Hi.
Ah, hello, my love. This is so good to see you.
He's here too, saying hi.
I love that.
Hi, darling. It's lovely to see you.
You
So I just wanted to say, you know, my husband, they were living in the Palazzo Capponi, which is right opposite, you know, in front of the Arno, and he was 5 when the flood happened. And he always just gives me this image that he was watching from this window and just the river swelling and the detail, you know, there was wardrobes and there were bloated dead cows and there were bits of cars, and it was just this, you know, the debris that had been washed all the way through. It was extraordinary.
Hard to imagine, isn't it? Because it's always low and it's a bit green and you see the riverbanks. It's really hard to imagine that force. I often look over there and go,
you know what, one other thing about looking out the window, and many pictures of the time caught it, is the circumstance that this was in early November 4th, and then as well as now, the city or the state regulates when you can begin using heat. So all the businesses, all the homes, apartments, everything had barrels of oil in their basements. And so a major part of the destruction was not the water, it was the oil that came out and was like we know with stories of tankers that bust on the ocean. Well, here was this whole city, or the lower parts, all covered in oil, and that's what trapped the birds and the animals and the produce and the products of all the stores.
Yeah, true.
And you know, the friars of Santa Croce, they said 4 days after the flood happened, they were in the cenacolo taking the water out with the buckets. And one of them said they found live fish swimming around. And then they just said, Arno simply moved in.
Yeah. Oh, nice phrase. Nice
I'm
phrase.
aware of our time. A question is here. I hear there's a sequel coming. When? I hope this is not a top secret.
No, it's not a top secret. I've just kept it quiet. Because I didn't know whether I could do it. I still don't know if I can do it, because I'm still in that space of wanting to know what it is and why. And I think I'm getting there. So at the moment, there will be one, but I don't know when. There was always going to be 2 books. In my head, there was always 2. It would just have been broken up in a different way. And so, you know, I've never written a continuity before. I admire anyone who does. This is not easy. This isn't just going, oh, I'm just going to bung a few characters in and just like knock one off. It does not work like that. It is, I find it so complex. And, you know, and as soon as I even start tiptoeing towards something I've written before, I get this, like, I shut down. I'm so bored. You know, it's a very strange thing that I'm doing, but I am committed to it. I am committed to doing it now. Now I know what, and I really want to take them into old age. I think that's the next thing that I'm interested in storytelling, because I know people going, oh no, why are you doing that? They're going to be old. And I went, yes, and I owe them that. I really owe them a good old age.
And
Or-
Sarah,
or
I do
what,
have
you
a
know.
I do have a visual to give you.
Go
So
on.
Michelangelo, after the success of his David, Michelangelo was supposed to also make the companion piece to it. It was supposed to be Hercules. He never got to it. So the Hercules we see in front of Palazzo Vecchio is actually done by Baccio Bandinelli. And it's not really a successful work of art. It was never loved by the Florentines. So I think you have to continue on and create the second piece. Don't be like Michelangelo. Don't leave it half done.
No, no, no. Stella would say, don't be like Michelangelo at all.
True.
No, so I mean, yes. So you know, I think it will happen, but it's when, I don't know. I feel more committed to getting this one right than anyone. And I don't know what right means, but just right for myself. You know, and it's going to take time to do it justice and to do them justice. So, you know, we shall see. But yeah, that's where I'm at the moment.
Kat had a lovely question. Kat, do you want to just read your question to us or share it with us?
Oh, I think I wrote a couple things.
Yeah, they're both great.
One is, would there be a movie? I love your book so much. And I heard in an interview that you sometimes spoke the words to see how they would go in the book. And I found myself reading passages over and again. And I was there in 71, 72. And Paola had us back, 3 years ago. And it was just so delightful. But thank you so much. It's my favorite book. I've told everybody in the world to read it because it's fabulous. And your characters are amazing. I loved every one of them, even Cole. By the end of the book, I even loved him.
Well, thank you for that. You know, thank you for what you said. I think Cole is he's very interesting to me. In fact, Cole is quite an important character, as far as if we were to look at English males in this country and the journey I want to take them on. He's allowing me to take on a journey from bigotry and misogyny and a lot of other things to opening up into something else. And I like him because I think it's, you know, change is possible. You know, women change all the time. Men need to change. It's as simple as that, you know. And so he's an important character to show that change can happen. And change can happen in an incredibly subtle way. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be people, you know, shaming people, but you know, change can. So I'm glad that you kind of came around to Cole in the end. I think Cole will remain if I, you know, carry on with his continuity to a point.
Yeah.
And yeah, there will be. I think we're working on a TV at the moment, so it will be episodic. But again, it's sort of early days unless these things suddenly take off. But yeah, I've written with a mate the pilot, and I think that's okay. I think that works well. I think it holds the kind of the feeling of the book, which was very important. So yeah.
Amazing.
All these things go. I don't know.
Yes. Well, it is going to be wonderful to see this, to follow this journey with you. There are 3 more things in the questions. It's okay if we address them? I know it's also our hour is up. Is that okay, Sarah?
That's totally fine.
I think Marcia, maybe Marcia is here and she can actually share it with us quickly, that she was actually in Florence just after the flood. I'm not sure. Marcia, are you here?
I'm here, right, great, here.
Hi.
Went to Florence, excuse me, the year after the flood, pardon me, and they were still, had canvases on the steps of the Uffizi, and all the buildings were trying to clean out their basements and so forth. And the watermark was just extraordinary, which you can still see. But the Florentines were so busy. Everybody, pardon me, was working hard to help. Everyone was helping. And then the other thing is I lived at the Via Caponi also. One of the people said that her husband grew up there. We lived there for a few months 2 years ago. It's still gorgeous. Tell her it's still beautiful.
Wow.
Yeah,
How
very fun.
beautiful.
Thank you so much. You've been so helpful. I'm an art historian.
Ah,
First round, now I'm a psychologist also, but I go to Florence as often as I get the opportunity, maybe every 2 years. It's fabulous. And you're right, everyone's a victim. We can't help ourselves, right? Thank you.
it's true. Thank you. Thanks.
Sarah, another question is that there's another Mud Angel with us, Joanne, who was here from California State University, actually. There were 12 senior students who arrived to Florence. So they were actually working in Biblioteca Nazionale as well. Joanne, if you want to just pop in and say hello. And then also Liz is asking who will play Evelyn. Will it be Judy, Helen Mirren or Judy Dencher? Do you have who would be a perfect actress to play the main character?
I don't, I don't. It's so out of my hands. I think when you're writing with a screenwriter, it's the producers. They're the important people. I'm not sure how much say I will get. And we're so far away from that, really. We're nowhere near any form of casting. So I don't know. I don't know who would be right. I suppose I haven't really thought too much about it because I know that my input is going to be minimal. So I don't want to get too hung up on someone and kind of think that's how it's going to work. So I don't at the moment.
I'd put a plug in for Olivia Colman.
Yeah, well, she's great.
Yeah.
She's great. She's a wonderful actress. Yeah, well, if we can get her in somehow, that would be nice.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Sarah, thank you so much for coming abroad.
My
I just
pleasure.
wanted to say, I see Joan is here. Joan, if you want to say hi as the Mud Angel, we should honor you this evening.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Yes, I just returned from Florence and I'm jet lagged, so I didn't have my picture up, so I apologize. But Florence is very dear to me, and we had a similar relationship or experience that Barbara explained earlier. But it left a lasting impression on all of us, and we're still close friends after all these years. We were there for a whole year, and we experienced walking through the mud and the NAFTA, and on weekends to get a shower, we would take a train to Bologna, and they had showers at the train station, and we would take showers and have lunch and then get back on the train and go back. So,
oh, that's a fabulous story. I wish I could have had that one. It's a lovely story. You got to train out to get a shower, bit of lunch, pop back, get dirty again. Love it. Brilliant.
thank you. Thank you.
Maybe this can be Alice's memory in the next book, Alice remembering the past and how she was a young student and going to Bologna.
Well, do you know what? If it is, I'll get back to you,
Yes.
and I will get permissions and all of that. But it's nice food for thought. That's such a wonderful, wonderful image. Brilliant image.
Sarah, thank you so much. Thank you for coming to the Studiolo, and thank you everyone for tuning in. The next appointment in the Studiolo will be with an art historian, Lynn Humphreys, who will come in on May 11th, and we will talk about illuminated manuscript, one of the Venetian confraternities. So a very different topic awaits, and I hope you will be joining us in May as well. Grazie mille.
Thank you so much, Paola.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been such a fun evening. I hope to meet you soon as well.
It will be such a pleasure. Next time for sure.
Great. Thank you, everybody. It's been really lovely chatting.